Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. On the podcast today, we have Dr. Chris Dudgeon from Australia talking about walking sharks, talking about zebra and leopard sharks, and which is the right name to use. We're going to talk all about that on today's episode. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. I'm your co-host, Andrew Lewin, with my other co-host, Dr. David Ebert. Dave, you're calling from the mountains today, and we're talking to somebody in Australia on a Sunday night after the World Cup. As this is recorded, obviously this will be put up after. Very exciting World Cup, very exciting interview talking about beyond the World Cup and talking about walking sharks and talking about a number of different sharks, including the very controversial leopard or zebra shark. Which one do we call it? But yeah, I think it's going to be a fun interview for people to get along. You've known Chris for quite some time. Yep. Do you want to say something before we get into this interview?
No, I think I had not seen. Just as I mentioned, I'd just seen Chris at the Sharks International in May, and I hadn't seen her for several years. And I thought, oh, this should be a great one to have on the podcast. And then coincidentally, after I invited her on the podcast, found out she had a shark named after her.
Yeah,
and so awesome. What a coincidence! And it was great. We had Jess Blakeway on last week, and if you haven't caught that one, you have to catch that episode. And she'll give you all the insights if you're a grad student on how to butter up your professor by naming a shark after her or him. And but no, Chris was great today. I could have gone another half hour with her. Yeah. And we'll definitely, she'll be back for another follow-up episode here at some point. But no, she is terrific, and I'm really glad we had her on. And let's why don't we start the show here, and we'll come
absolutely
back.
All right, here's the interview with Dr. Chris Dudgeon. Enjoy, and we'll talk to you after. Hey Chris, welcome to the Beyond Jaws podcast. Are you ready to talk about walking sharks?
I am. Hi, Andrew.
All right.
Well, welcome to the Beyond Jaws podcast, where today we have a phenomenal guest, the amazing Dr. Christine Dudgeon. However, first we need to acknowledge Spain's win in the FIFA World Cup soccer that just concluded. And although you have an Australian, a Canadian, and an American here, we all watched the match and thoroughly enjoyed it. And Chris watched the match in the middle of her night in Australia, so she actually kind of deserves the Iron Woman Award for making the podcast on limited sleep. So, Chris is a senior researcher at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia, and she's also at the BioPixel Ocean Foundation, where she investigates how biodiversity originates and is maintained through time. Chris's research examines the evolutionary process that drives the emergence of species and populations alongside the ecological mechanisms that sustain them in modern ecosystems. By bridging the fundamental science with applied wildlife management, her work directly informs conservation, recovery, and policy initiatives. Chris works across a wide range of marine organisms, including corals, seabirds, fishes, and whales, and particularly it focuses on chondrichthyans, the sharks, the rays, and the chimeras, or ghost sharks, as I like to call them. Her research has contributed to the discovery and description of new species of sharks and bony fishes, advancing scientific understanding of marine biodiversity while highlighting the importance of taxonomy and conservation. Her PhD research focused on the population ecology of the Indo-Pacific leopard sharks, which most of us call zebra sharks, providing critical insights into their movements, patterns, demography, and conservation needs. She's a foundational member of the world's first rewilding program, the StAR Program, which is Stegostoma tigrinum, the scientific name, augmentation and recovery, which delivered under the Global Reef Shark Initiative, and focus on the recovery of the species. Chris has been a member of the IUCN Shark Specialist Group since 2015 and has served as a vice co-chair since 2021. In this role, she contributes to the global conservation assessment, strategic planning, and policy guidance for sharks and rays worldwide. Chris has over 75 peer-reviewed publications and has mentored 13 PhD students, 4 MSc students, and 11 honor students. And one of her current students is Jess Blakeway, who was just on the podcast last week and described the species of walking shark, a new species of walking shark after Chris. Chris's educational background: she has a BSc from James Cook University, and she also has a BSc honors, and she has her PhD from the University of Queensland. And Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Great. So, well, I'll ask you the question we always ask our guests is, how did you get interested in sharks and marine science?
Yeah, thank you. So it's a funny one. I know lots of marine biologists that grew up inland. So I did my high school years in a place called Canberra, which Americans may be familiar with, but it's our capital city, and in Australia. And they couldn't decide between Sydney or Melbourne, which are the big cities. So they put the capital in between in Canberra. So it's about 2 hours from the coast. And I used to spend a couple of weeks every summer down the coast of southern New South Wales, south of Sydney, and it was my favourite time of the year. I just love going to the ocean. It's a beautiful area, rocky headlands, and you'd see things like the big black stingrays, southern stingrays that would come in really close, and lots of rock pools and activity. So I think that just sort of captured my imagination of wanting to do marine science. With sharks in particular, my earliest memory of them being on my radar was maybe 14, 15, and I saw an interview with a famous shark fisherman in Australia who had these sort of funny museums, and he basically justified killing big sharks by saying that because we killed a lot of the fish, they didn't have food left, so we needed to then also remove them. And I don't think I even was familiar with the concept of sustainability at the time, but I just thought there might be a better way of managing that situation, such as how about we leave them some fish to eat, and then perhaps we can all have something. And so I think, I decided I wanted to learn more about it and perhaps be a voice for them.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
So as you went through your schooling and everything, you got through high school, you're still interested in marine science. You ended up going to James Cook University?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
And why that particular university?
So at the time, so this is the 90s, last century. At the time in Australia, we had two main unis that were known for marine science. So James Cook is in Townsville in the tropics and has a strong focus on coral reefs. And the other university that was big for marine science was the University of Tasmania, which is also has the Australian Antarctic Division sort of connected to it. So that's cold water stuff. I am not a cold person, so this was really, in many aspects, just a pragmatic choice of that I prefer being in warmer water. And so I chose to go to JCU. Yeah.
Okay. And who was Colin Simpfendorfer there at the time, or is that before Colin?
So no, I kind of was there in between Colin's times. So
Okay.
I think maybe when I turned up, Colin's a little bit older than me, but I think maybe when I turned up, he was still there as a postgrad. But I, as a brand new undergrad, I wouldn't have had access to any postgrads at that time. And then when I got to postgrad, Colin had left. And so I was interested in doing work on sharks, but there wasn't anything available at JCU. So my honours was actually on parrotfish, and I worked, I sort of was in the beginning stages of molecular ecology, which was one of the fields I was interested in, along with field biology and ecology. And so my honours project was the first time that mitochondrial DNA sequencing was used to examine population genetics of reef fish in the Great Barrier Reef. So it was pretty early days, and I managed to sort of from those skills I got a lot of jobs. So people kept employing me to work on different mainly coral and reef fish projects. But I was very interested in studying sharks, and there just really wasn't anything happening at JCU at that time, which is funny because, of course, it's really well known as a shark research centre. Mm-hmm. So after I left, Colin and Michelle Heipel came to JCU and set up their fish and fisheries, and Michelle had her aims at JCU programs. So, I kind of missed them, but,
Yeah, because when you were starting out in the 90s, there was John Stevens and Peter Last but they were down in Hobart at the time.
Yeah.
They were with CSIRO.
Yeah, the
But
cold place that I didn't go to. Yeah.
Yeah, the cold place. Yes, yes, and they're really. I think it's probably people like a lot of the younger people today don't realize that the shark. It was sort of like in the U.S. in the '80s and even into the '90s. There was just shark research was not like it is today. There were not many institutions that were doing it really that much. It really came on a little more. Well, probably people like yourselves when you got into the 2000s and you started doing more work at the university, you started having students. I think would that be a fair?
Yeah. So when I was looking into PhDs, it was really, as you said, the people that were driving the shark research in Australia, you could probably count them on two hands, and most of them were associated with government organisations like CSIRO or the state fisheries organisation. So many of them were not just shark researchers, right? So they worked on lots of different programs, and sharks were one of the things they got to work on. I think John Stevens was a bit of an anomaly. I think he managed to just work mostly on sharks, but certainly, the other main scientists driving things at that time. And then there was kind of this next generation coming through, which I guess was, Colin, Michelle, Will White, with a lot of the taxonomy stuff that was happening. And then we're kind of the next generation after that.
Yeah.
And so my contemporaries, we started really in the early 2000s. And so other people I can sort of point to from that time. So Pete Kine, Charlie Hooverneers, Simon Pearce, these are people I went through with, Shannon Corrigan, Lindsay Marshall, Andrea Marshall, she was we overlapped as well at UQ, and several others. So and Cynthia Ulrich, we were just mentioning her as well. So
sorry, Cynthia.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, Argentina lost. We'll commiserate with her later. Yeah. And so actually, what happened at that time was that we didn't have a society. And a lot of us our supervisors were not necessarily shark biologists. So my primary supervisor was a marine mammal expert working on dugongs. I know Charlie went through a marine mammal lab. So, there was, or teleos specialist, etc. So it was, we didn't have a sort of a society dedicated to that. We would go to the Australian Society of Fish Biology conferences. But as the shark research was building, you'd basically spend the whole time at the conference in the shark room. And so it was in 2004 that we actually, our mainly PhD cohort, coordinated to start the Oceania Chondrichthyan Society. So I'm a founding member of that, along with Cynthia and Charlie and several others. So, that was really, we had a critical mass of, students really starting to focus on chondrichthyans to be able to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember at the 2005 Indo-Pacific, I think for a lot, that was the first time I met a number of you. I think it was the first time I think you and I met there at that conference there the first time, and I just remember a lot of people. Australia had a really good contingent of young people attending that conference at the time. I obviously knew Will, and I knew Pete Kind at the time already, but like I said, a number of you showed up at that Indo-Pacific, which was a good showing. Really, looking back now on it at the time. At that point, you kind of started formulating the whole. Had you had your first OCS meeting at that time? Oceania Chondrichthyan?
No, so I think that was the one in Taiwan. Is that
Yes.
the one you're talking about? Yeah. So that was 2004, and our first OCS was 2005.
Okay.
That's when that's when we founded. Yeah.
Okay. I was trying to remember. I knew it was back in that era there and stuff, and yeah, it was kind of cool. And actually, I was a member there, as you know, for quite a few years there. It was kind of a fun conference. It's just, for me, it's a long ways to go from California to Australia for a 2-day conference, but it's a lot of fun. Plus, I was doing a lot of work with Will White at the time too, so I had an excuse to be in Australia. So anyway, did you see when the OCS is really helping pull a lot of the Australian sort of sharky people together to kind of really start to build off the whole thing from that point on, as the OCS started to come together and everything that helped drive a lot of the shark?
I do think it's quite a cohesive network, and particularly, I mean, one of the things that we were really passionate about when we started it was that this was a conference that was largely built, or a society largely built by students for students. And so we've always made sure that the conferences are really affordable, lots of support to get people there, and having that very sort of open, welcoming, friendly society. And I think that that's really held through. So there was a conference last year held at the Sunshine Coast, and that was celebrating 20 years since the founding of the conference, and it was really a lovely conference to be a part of. Colin was celebrated as a Lifetime Member Achievement Award, and so and I think just to have the moment to really appreciate what he's done for Australian chondrichthyan research and conservation is really important, and I think he felt quite touched to be recognised by the next generations coming through as well. I think sometimes, I mean, we've all done it, but as the younger ones come through, they kind of forget that there were people that paved the way that did some stuff before them, like they're inventing everything for the first time, which is great energy, but sometimes we've got to stop and reflect and just remember what people have done, and I think it's a really, really nice society. I think it's a really supportive society, and it gives opportunities for progressing a lot of this work in Australia. And it is regional, so it's not just Australia, it's New Zealand and the Oceania region.
Yeah. But backing up a little bit, when you were doing this, was this during your PhD when you guys were starting the OCS at that time?
Yeah.
Okay, because there's, like I said, that sort of cohort of yours was really sort of the first group that really started to get together, sort of in mass, as far as doing in mass, started doing the research and stuff. So that was kind of pretty dynamic thing for you guys, being students like that and starting up a shark society. How was that? Kind of had that feel looking back on it now?
Oh, I'm so proud of it. Like, it's such a wonderful thing to have been a part of, and so I was honoured to be invited as a keynote last year for the 20-year celebration, and it was really looking around. It was the largest OCS that we've ever had. It was amazing to see how much it's grown, and all the new generations coming through. It was just fantastic. There's so many fantastic new students, and it's really heavily student driven, which is super important.
Now, how were you navigating when you were coming through? Like you said, you worked on parrotfishes for your undergraduate, for your honors, and so when you went to do your PhD, how did you convince your advisor that you're going to work on zebra/leopard sharks?
Well, I think, like many of these things, it's just very serendipitous timing. So, my project was advertised on a notice board at UQ, and so a friend of mine had moved from Townsville to Brisbane to start his PhD. He worked on humpback whale song, and he saw this PhD advertised, and it was just sort of quite general, the ecology of leopard sharks. And what had happened was that there was a student based out of Brisbane, where I am now, who had started doing some work, and he tagged a couple of these animals. So we have them aggregate off our coast here every summer. So he put some fin tags in a couple of animals, but he couldn't continue the work. And so my supervisor, Janet Lanyon, who her expertise is dugongs, but she was supervising him because at that time, again, there weren't any people who really, were working specifically on sharks. And so she thought the project was interesting and wanted somebody to continue it. And I so my friend told me about the project. I contacted her, and she was just about to go on maternity leave, and I think she just went, "Yep, great, apply." And so, I just very quickly want to make a comment here too. So a few weeks ago, Janet died, and it was quite abrupt. And I just wanted to kind of take a moment to, just reflect on that she gave me this opportunity and as my mentor, and it was really important. And so I'm, super grateful to her for that. And I think it's really important, to know those things, going forward and pass that on, to the next generation who are wanting to do these things. And I came from a lab background mostly, but I had been doing a fair bit of volunteer work in the field because I wanted to be a field biologist as well. And so, Janet supported that, but she also encouraged me to do genetics work too, which was great, and I'm still doing it, so it was, highly valuable. But yeah, it was a massive learning curve because I'd never seen one of these animals in the wild. I had no idea how we were going to do any of this. So we wanted to go out. Could we use photo ID to track them over time? Would the animals be there? How easy is it to approach them? How do we take tissue samples from them? How do we, attach? It was early days of acoustic tracking, so we were, attaching acoustic tags to them. How do we catch them? All of those things. So it was just massive learning curve. Janet was like, "Yeah, just go, figure it out, go on," and
the
we
best
did.
way.
So and spoiler alert, it worked.
Yeah.
So
And how'd she happen to suggest the zebra sharks or the leopard sharks for you?
well, there was the student that had started some of that work. So they just done a little bit, and that's how come that species had been flagged. So at that time, there was another lab at the University of Queensland that the head of was Mike Bennett. And Mike Bennett was the PhD advisor for people like Pete Kine, Andrea Marshall, Simon Pearce. So that was sort of the shark and ray lab. And a lot of the work that was happening locally in Mike's lab was very fishing based and inside Moreton Bay, where this work meant for the leopard sharks, we needed to go on the outside. So we needed to go across, the breakers and into more the surf area. And there wasn't really that happening. So I think that was sort of pushing limits to take it further offshore and get into some more of the deeper, more exposed areas as well.
I love your comment Janet gave you about go figure it out yourself, because if people listen to that podcast, when I started out in the early 80s, it was the exact situation you described in Australia. There was nothing going on in the States. And it was just I remember Lisa Natanson and I showed up and a few others at Moss Landing, and Greg Kai was just go figure it out, guys. Good luck. There was no, and you probably experienced this. You probably learned a hell of a lot because there was no roadmap. It was you had to go figure it out. And young people listening today, I can't stress that enough, that people like Chris and I have lived that. It's just go figure it out. Don't you'll learn more. You'll be a much better scientist, researcher, figuring it out on yourself than having your hand held for you. So anyway,
and it's the fun stuff too, right? Because it's and the other stuff I loved about it is it was a sort of a blank slate project. So, and this was really the first time this species had been studied. And you said giving advice to the next generation, when people say, "How do you become a world expert on something?" I'm like, study something nobody's looked at.
Exactly.
It's quite easy. If you go for manta rays or whale sharks or white sharks, it's a bit harder to become the expert. Go for an obscure species nobody's bothered to look at yet, then you can skip a lot of that groundwork.
Yeah, that's great. Yep, that's the best advice I could say. So as you got along, you worked on the leopard sharks and you kind of advanced your career. Some of these projects you got into doing now, I'm kind of jumping forward a little bit, but like the StAR Project and some of the stuff you're doing now, the walking sharks. How did you get involved in some of those different projects?
I'll talk about the walking sharks because that's sort of chronologically the next thing. So I actually started working on walking sharks in my PhD as well.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't part of my PhD, but was a bit of a side quest. And this comes from me having worked on teleos beforehand. So one of the people I'd worked with on a Gobi project, he'd been approached by Gerry Allen looking for someone to do the genetics on potential new species description. And I'm not sure how familiar everyone here is with Gerry Allen, but he's sort of one of the world's foremost fish taxonomists. And in the chondrichthyan world, he's the leading taxonomist for the walking sharks. And so over the last, 15 years, he's described 5 species. Yeah.
He's somebody the young people should know who he is. So.
Yeah, and as somebody working in the fish world, I was pretty excited to get to work with Gerry Allen. So this is 20 years ago. So, I mean, he's now described over 600, something like 600 species. It's extraordinary. And he's just an awesome person to work with. And he's really he's 84 and he's still going.
Yeah.
So we're still describing new species, other bony fish, and he's still diving, he's still doing it. That's amazing. Just extraordinary, yeah.
Yeah.
And so when I'd been contacted through Phil and about, would I be willing to sort of help Gerry out, I was like, yes, please. And so this was for 2 species of walking shark in eastern Indonesia. I wasn't on this paper, but I did the genetics work sort of as a volunteer. I was excited to be involved in some of the species description because I hadn't really done that work at that time. And the co-author with Gerry was someone named Mark Erdman, who I had not heard of, but is now someone I work with very closely for many, many years. And then a few years later, Gerry got back in touch with me and asked me if I would help with another walking shark species, which turned out to be Hemiscyllium michaeli, the one that's the focus of Jess's PhD work in Milne Bay. And so Gerry and I are the species authorities on that one. And then there was one more, Hemiscyllium halmahera, a couple of years later. And then following on from that, we did work on sort of looking at the group as a whole, sort of a synthesis of the whole, at that time, 9 species of walking sharks and also some phylogenetic evolutionary work on the group and IUCN Red List assessment work with them as well. And then really things started working up again when Jess came and approached me about wanting to do a PhD. So she'd been... presuming she's told her story, so she talked about, she basically wanted to work on this Milne Bay species or Hemiscyllium michaeli that she'd been doing some work on as a volunteer. Came to me as one of the species authorities wanting to work on it, and then it sort of went from there.
Okay. So I got to ask the question: how does it feel to have a shark named after you?
Still quite surreal. It's
Was it a
amazing.
surprise when you was it a surprise when she presented it to you, or did you know this was happening?
Yeah, so I guess the way the story goes. So when we found, when I sort of caught the first one on this expedition, and then we suspected. So Jess was the first person to recognise that it had a brand new pattern and that it was probably something different. But we only had one individual. And then over the next few days, we caught this, collectively another 11. And at that time, Gerry was convinced. So Gerry was on the trip with us, and he was already convinced that this was a new species. But the genetics still needed to be done. And in the past, that was my bit. But I think they all went and conspired, Gerry, Mark, and Jess, and then basically came back and went, you're not working on this, this is Jess's project and we're naming it after you. And so I was pretty floored at that point in time. Now, it did take a year from then till, or over a year from that point in time to the actual publication recently. And of course, you know, things could happen. So I wouldn't say I'm a glass half empty person, but I'm a skeptic until like something's actually, you know, for real. I'm not going to celebrate it until it's for real. So once that publication came out, I just went, oh my God, this is actually real now. So
are you going to frame the picture of the fish? Like I get an illustration and get it up on your wall?
Oh yeah.
So we asked Jess. We had people that her podcast was up last week. We asked her and young students listening to this, like, if you really want to butter up your advisor, name a shark after him.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure you're gonna read that chapter a lot differently.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good way to keep them in favor. That's for sure. I'm not setting the bar for my other students, so like they don't need to freak out about that. It's okay. No. Other bribes will do. Other bribes.
Love it.
Yeah. So, but now, did you just get the one new species in this one, or was there more than one?
Of Hemiscyllium.
Yeah. Was it just the one?
Well, named after me or in general. So obviously I can only have one Hemiscyllium.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So there was the one new species that has now been described.
Yeah.
There are likely more, but there's a bit of work that needs to be done.
Yeah. Good.
So.
Well, you can listen to the podcast, but Jess was, let's say, a little enthusiastic when she showed you the different sharks, and she had to express your reaction at the time. So.
Every time she came out, it's like, well, that's new. I haven't seen this one before. I haven't seen this one.
She expressed it a little more enthusiastically than Andrew did. Let's put it that way. So, but go listen to the podcast, and people listen to it. If you didn't listen to it already, catch it. It was pretty funny the way she explained it. The interesting thing, and you've been to Papua New Guinea several times and stuff. And I've got to say that's a group that fascinates me just because I've never worked on them at all, but just because and we talked to Jess about this, is like you have such a high endemism in such a small area, and you've been looking at this stuff. What's your sort of thoughts or opinions on the thing?
Yeah, this has been a complete. I think my mind's been a bit blown with what's happening here. So when we started the expedition work a couple of years ago, and we were doing the expedition along the southern island sort of chain that goes all the way out to the east, and I think Jess would have explained that how we sort of went from looking for the Milne Bay one, and then we got to this next wonderfully named place, Panapompom, and then all of a sudden we're seeing a different species, the Port Moresby one, and then we're getting to a next place, and we're sort of seeing this mosaic distribution of these species that was completely unexpected. And that first gap, that's a really deep channel. So that's a thing called the Jarman Channel. If you look at like any of those shipping maps, you can see that's like the main shipping channel that boats leave from Australia and go north through PNG to head sort of past Singapore and keep going up that way. But then we're seeing these other things. There's nothing obvious. There's just nothing obvious about what, if you look back in the tectonic history or, you know, any of the current barriers, why would that be a species break? And particularly with this new species, you know, that's unclear where that boundary is, and therefore, you know, what is really, you know, keeping those things apart, which I find absolutely fascinating. And also, particularly with these animals, because they only differ visually in body pattern, you know, are there other things that we're missing? You know, are we seeing the body pattern of a particular species, but in fact it's something else? And also, potential hybrid zones. So we don't know if they do this or not. And Northern Australia is also really interesting for this because we have this nice continuum up through the Great Barrier Reef, through the Torres Strait into Papua New Guinea. So these are our neighbours, and we share, species across those borders, and particularly with Hemiscyllium, we don't really know where the Great Barrier Reef one ends and the Port Moresby one starts. So that's an area of interest that we really want to go exploring further. Biggest challenge really, they do sort of co-occur with saltwater crocodiles. So that's our, we're starting to look at some eDNA methods and things to try and perhaps get around those limitations. I have to say it's possibly my least favourite bit of that field work is the feeling of swimming around at night time with, in what theoretically could be saltwater crocodile territory.
You might need Julia Constance for that one.
Yeah.
Yes, she's good at spotting them. That's right.
Yeah, she was just on the podcast here, and we talked a lot about because I went out on a trip with her, and the saltwater crocodiles there. And I was going to ask Jess that question about, because she said you guys were going out, she's talking about, we're just going around diving at night, or picking up these things. And I'm thinking man, are there some saltwater crocodiles an issue there? And
apparently.
Yeah, I mean,
and I know Julia doesn't really go in the water as much.
No, of course not.
She does more fishing-based, sense.
Yeah.
But Northern Australia is particularly crazy with numbers of saltwater crocodiles. I think in Papua New Guinea they've removed a lot of them, particularly like near the villages and things.
Right.
But the very first village we went to when we did the very first expedition, and so one of the things I love about Jess's work is that when we go to a new village, we talk savvy with the village to begin with. So we get permission to come on,
Right.
meet with the elders and get their permission, and often the villagers will basically help us to look for the animals and tell us where they are. And then the first place we went to, and so I asked, okay, so what about the crocodiles, which they call puk-puk? So what about the puk-puk? And they're like, oh, no, it's not a problem. It's only a problem if they're hungry. Like, how do we know? Has anyone interviewed them recently?
Are they hungry? Are they going?
Yes. After that, I was always a bit dubious, but yeah.
Well, let me ask you this: like, is it saltwater crocodiles having these leopard sharks or zebra sharks that are around who might be a little more difficult to find? Would saltwater crocs be a predator of these sharks, and could be why you don't see them as often in Northern Australia?
So this is more the walking shark thing, but the zebra/leopard sharks are found in these similar areas as well, like sort of distribution wise, but tend to be a bit deeper. I don't think they're a target species for saltwater crocodiles.
Okay.
So they're just a bit more cryptic. So because during the day they tend to be hiding. During night, so often we do work at night because the walking sharks come out at night time, and we can catch them walking as well. So if it's a really low tide and you can just walk on the reef flat, you can pick them up out of tidal pools and things, which is sort of the easiest way to get them. But you can snorkel or dive. We do find them during the day, but you usually have to look right in under ledges and things like
Gotcha.
that. So. It's more their cryptic nature than I would say
Gotcha.
the
Okay.
predation. Yeah.
So the water. I assume the water's pretty clear where you guys are diving.
No, not always.
Dear God.
Oh, now you're really talking
Because these
croc
things
habitat.
they're in mangroves, they're in
Right.
seagrass, they're in coral reef. So we're starting at shore through. So yeah, I mean it's not. We're not diving in super turbid water, but
Right.
we are. Nighttime you only see the torch.
Yeah. Okay. So it's not. Well, the only reason I ask is, Julie and I talked about that, and I've talked to. So we're in Timor-Leste, which is close by, and man, you want to talk about crocodiles? Holy smokes! There are thousands and thousands of crocodiles there. They're everywhere.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
They're everywhere there. So
Yeah.
I meant to ask Jess that, but she was just like, "Oh yeah, then we go diving here and we'll catch them here." And but I guess at this point in your career, you can just bring a lot of grad students with you, and
Fling them in first. That's right. See what happens.
literally let them go test the waters for you.
Well, I do also work with some quite fearless people. So Mark Erdman, I don't think has fear. So just talking about low visibility. So with the StAR Project, if we talk about that, we've been doing some more work off Australia on the Indo-Pacific leopard sharks to inform their biology and ecology. And the first time Mark came out with me, there'd been some big rains on the east coast, so the water was so dirty, and we're diving offshore, so sometimes it can be beautiful, clear, 20-meter visibility. This day it was, you couldn't see your hand. And I said to Mark, there's no point going in. And he went, oh, we'll go in. And I'm like, there's no point going in. And so, we've gone in, like we've hit the bottom of the reef in 6 meters before we can see anything. And I just turned to him and went, no, we're leaving now. And this is bull shark territory, so,
Yeah.
And I just went, no self-respecting leopard shark is going to be in these conditions. So, even if we swim around looking for them, we're not going to find one. They will have moved off into nicer, deeper, clearer water. And I'm not staying in this water. So, yeah. But he was quite willing to, keep searching in these conditions. And I was like, no.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of dumb. Sorry, Steve. It's like, because I've seen those bull sharks when it's clear, they'll kind of stay back. But man, you get that visibility goes down, they just start coming right in. They get real. I their behavior just changes, becoming from kind of very much staring away to just becoming just fearless.
It's their prime conditions is when the visibility is poor. So but as you said, in clearer water, not a problem at all. They won't come anywhere near you. So those are the conditions I'll go out in.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, why go in the water too if you're not going to find if they're not going to be there at all? They'll be there and stuff. So that's. Do you have any? I'm kind of curious. I want to hear a little more about Is there anything else to the walking sharks you wanted to add when we talk about your reshark project?
Yeah, we can pivot to reshark.
Yeah, sure.
Give the leopards some love.
Yeah, leopard, zebra, whatever. So anyway, you say leopard, I say zebra. Anyway, let's go. You call it.
So, would you like me to explain the difference?
Sure.
Yes,
why
please.
don't you? Yeah.
Just to clarify, so I suppose you have in America on the west coast a leopard shark. Yep.
Absolutely.
That's found off California and Mexico.
Know it very well.
And that's your dogfish species.
No.
So
that's not a dogfish. Dogfish is a separate thing.
It's a triacu.
These are a hound shark. It's triacus.
Hound shark.
Hound shark. Yes.
All right.
Okay.
So see how the common names there going in there.
Yeah.
Sorry, I shall not call it a dogfish. Hound shark.
Hound shark.
So completely different order from the Indo-Pacific leopard shark. And so the reason that it's called a zebra shark, actually I should go back and explain. So that species, the triacus, is only found in the Eastern Pacific on that coastline of California down to Mexico. So the Indo-Pacific leopard shark's found in the West Pacific all through the Indian Ocean and in subtropical and tropical locations. So they don't co-occur in the wild.
Right.
And the only place that they co-occur is in aquariums. And I think that's where needing two different common names came to play. And so leopard sharks, the Indo-Pacific leopard sharks breed quite well in aquariums, which is part of the StAR Project where we get to that. And they lay eggs. They have the largest eggs of any of the egg-laying sharks. And the pups hatch out at about 20 sort of to 30 centimeters in length. And when they hatch out, they're stripy. And that's where the zebra name comes from.
Yeah.
And then they undergo this massive transformation, arguably the biggest transformation of any shark species between juvenile to adult form. And when they become adults, they are spotty. And so the juvenile stage is not for very long. So they start losing their stripes, within weeks to months, really. So it's very, very rare to see a stripy one in the wild, but more common to see the adult spotting form. So where you do see these animals in the wild, say here off Australia, off Thailand, elsewhere, they're called leopard sharks because they're spotty.
Yeah.
So that's, and we don't have the other leopard shark.
Right.
So that's why we have two species called leopard shark, and it is confusing.
Well, I always grew up calling them zebra sharks, but you are right. The adult form, once they start to grow and they get the spots, they're more like a leopard shark would be a better appropriate name. But I think I was telling Jess that the juvenile form had been described as a different species.
Yes.
And that's where I'm guessing partly the whole leopard or the whole zebra shark thing, because they have stripes like you just stated, they have stripes like a zebra. And so,
Yeah.
but I'd always grown up hearing them called zebra sharks, and
Of course, yeah.
So when I was going overseas and Australians are calling them leopard sharks, it's like, what are you guys calling these? I know what a leopard shark is. Anyway, we're getting too much off in the weeds, but it's a good to know.
But here, if I go and talk to a local, they wouldn't have a clue what I'm talking about if I mentioned a zebra shark.
Yeah, and as you said, they don't even co-occur. One's an Eastern Pacific and the other one's Indo-Pacific species, but anyway, they're both pretty sharks.
So something that's interesting, as someone who doesn't have as much of a background as the two of you, I just looked it up on Google and said, difference between zebra shark and leopard shark, and it actually calls the Indo-Pacific zebra shark.
Oh, really?
But it has two different species, though, so I don't know if it says commonly called zebra sharks in the U.S., leopard sharks in Australia. So this is Stegostoma fasciatum? Is that the one we're talking about?
Yes, but the species name changed in 2018.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the same. But it's the only species in its family, so it's actually not like a difficult one taxonomically. Right.
Gotcha.
It's just that back in 2018 there was a Danish research group that were describing what they call the sandy morph. So the more regular morph is a yellowy brown with brown spots. And then in the Indian Ocean more so, you also get this sandy morph, which is almost grey. And it looks like the sort of colouring of a nurse shark, rather than having that sort of brown with the spots. And the juveniles start off differently too. They're really finely striped, almost like reticulations, rather than the bold stripes of the more normal or regular morph, if you call it.
Gotcha.
And so this Danish group were describing those pattern changes, and then they, as they were doing that work, they looked at some of the genetics to check that it wasn't a different species, but it's just a different morph, like we have in manta rays. You've got the chevron and the white-bellied dominant morphs. And so it's not a different species, but as they were doing that work, they realized that the nomenclature was incorrect. And so they were digging into the historical records of the naming and found that there was a valid name that predated Stegostoma fasciatum. And then this turns out to be Stegostoma tigrinum. So even though it's not going to be confused with anything else, it's still changed because of the rules of nomenclature. So
Gotcha.
Yeah. And just on the common name idea, I was joking around with Steve Kessel, who I've worked with on the StAR Project as well, and we with the common names, because he's based in America, so we have those discussions. And I said, well, maybe we could call that sandy morph a snow leopard shark. And then here off Brisbane, our populations are often very ornate, like they have quite almost more jaguar patterns, and I said, so maybe we could call these ones the jaguar shark, and that's a shout out to Steve Zissou, and I thought, that's not out there yet, so we could fix the whole nomenclature thing by doing this.
Yeah.
That would require quite a movement to change common
I'm sure.
Yeah.
There might be some debates too, some hot debates on that.
I think I shared this with you, but when I was in Madagascar, the locals there, the fishermen, when you show them pictures of like the blue spotted bamboo shark there, which is Hemiscyllium, but it's in the same family, different genus, they all think you're talking about the leopard shark, the Stegostoma.
Oh, right.
But they're small ones because when they see is the spots, even though the spots are bluish on the bamboo shark and they're brownish in that one, because what the tip off was they would say, "Oh, we see these all the time." And then I said, "Oh, really? What is it?" "Oh, yeah, they grow like 2.5 to 3 meters." And I'm like, "That's not the bamboo shark. They're like 60 centimeters, maybe max." But the small ones are mistaken for the bamboo sharks in Madagascar. And the blue spotted bamboo shark, if you follow my social media, it's endemic just to Madagascar, and it's only been up until recently. It only been seen one time in the last 120 years. So it's kind of
amazing.
Yeah. But I think it's because people are mistaking them for these other for the zebra leopard shark thing there. So anyway, so do you want to talk a little bit about the reef shark? What's the whole point or purpose?
The backstory to that was after my PhD for my postdoc, I wanted to find out more about the species in tropical locations, and so where I'm based, it's a bit more towards the edge of the distribution for the species, so they're quite seasonal. You see movements with relation to different water temperatures, and I was wondering, well, what happens when your water temperature doesn't really change? How does that impact migratory movements? And so I managed to make contact with a dive shop in Thailand, in the PP Islands, and so we set up this photo ID project called Spot the Leopard Shark. And the idea being, let's tap into the dive tourism industry and start collecting, data on when the sharks are there. And so that was great. We did that for a few years. And then the PP Islands are on the western side of Thailand. And then I went across to the Gulf of Thailand, and some colleagues were saying, "Oh, don't worry about coming here. There's no leopard sharks here." And I thought, but there should be, because this is actually a place where people would go and dive with them, and there's a massive dive tourism industry. So at that time, pre-COVID, they were certifying about 100,000 divers a year in the Gulf of Thailand, like massive dive tourism industry. And so that flagged that, this species has basically disappeared from these waters. And, I'd heard of the sort of shifting baselines concept with fishing, but not so much with the diving tourism industry. And so because it's such a huge turnover, anybody who had been there for sort of less than 7 or 8 years had not seen these animals. But if you talk to the older people that had been there for a while, they used to see them regularly.
Yeah.
And there was some data that had been collected separate to what I was doing that supported that. And around that time in 2015, we were reassessing Stegostoma for the IUCN Red List. And I reached out to Mark Erdman, and he and Gerry had been doing extensive fish biodiversity surveys all through Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. And so, tens of thousands, well, thousands into tens of thousands of dives throughout these areas, and asked him, what do you know about, what data do you have on these, that we can go back in time and see what was happening before. And so the same story came out, and, which was basically happening in front of people's eyes, that these animals were disappearing. They used to be there, they were regularly observed, they weren't anymore. There's not so much fishing data on them because they're not a particularly common species either, so you don't have any targeted fishing or, so it's very sporadic in fish markets. But what we would find is that there'd be a pulse of animals in a fish market where you would see like dozens. And, you know, we have one of the largest, healthiest populations here in southeast Queensland. And our population estimates are in, you know, the hundreds to few thousands. So when you're seeing, you know, those sorts of catches in one place, that's potentially quite a lot of a population, and particularly of breeding adults. And we also now, just with the photo ID, because we can match them as adults, we've now matched several animals for over 20 years in the wild coming back every year. Wow. So they seem to have this sort of site fidelity to particular locations. And so, you know, from these conversations with Mark, he'd also been working with aquarium folks on different projects, and noticed that they, at that time, Singapore Aquarium had a lot of pups, and they were sort of asking the question, well, can we release them into the wild? And so, you know, this was sort of the concept where StAR Project started, where we started thinking about, well, how would that work? You know, what would be needed to do something like that? What would we need to know about these animals, about where we're releasing them, you know, how would you go about it, etc. And so we sort of discussed this, you know, sort of started digging into it for a few years, and then in 2019 the project got some interest from some big aquariums in the US, so the Shed Aquarium, Georgia Aquarium, Seattle Aquarium came on board, and others. And so there was a big meeting to be held about, you know, is this something that, you know, we can do? Is it something we should do? And because this is a species that is in aquariums around the world, and it also breeds quite well in aquariums around the world. And there's been quite a big shift in terrestrial, you know, in zoos, into more, you know, sort of active conservation efforts of rewilding, but not so much in the aquarium space, and particularly not with, you know, elasmobranchs. And so a lot of interest, there was a lot of interest in this species, particularly as kind of a model species, because it's an egg layer, and some of the logistics about shipping eggs as opposed to shipping wild animals around the world. And so, yeah, basically all of these different partners signed on to do this project, and we got the green light from the IUCN Shark Specialist Group as well. And so the idea was to run this under what's known as the IUCN One Plan approach, which is a combination of bringing together, you know, the expertise of those of us that work with these animals in the wild with the expertise of those that work with them in the aquarium settings, and you know, then basically started from there. And that was 5 years ago that it kicked off.
Do you guys have any results or anything, or any feel for how it's going?
Yeah, so far we've now, it's a very big collaboration, so there's a lot of different partners involved. So the first project was set up in eastern Indonesia in Raja Ampat, and so this was supported by a couple of foundations that have associated resorts there. So they actually built hatcheries. So and we have these Indonesian conservation groups that manage all of that, and we work closely with. So Nesha Chida is our Indonesian program manager, who's an amazing young conservationist who just is a incredible energy and effort in wrangling all of this. And then we have what we call the shark nannies, and basically, or the aquarists. So their job is to raise these baby sharks. So they get them as eggs and then raise them up. And so they start to learn to eat live food immediately after hatching, and then they go into sea pens at a certain stage, and then once they reach about sort of 5 to 6 months of age and are large enough, they have an acoustic tag implanted, and then we release them. And so we're now over 75 animals have been released, and this is in Raja Ampat. We also have another project started in Thailand, and with Wild Aid, and our manager there is a lady named May, and again, amazing, local Thai team that are driving all of that. They haven't released as many so far, but they've had, I think it's 7 released, and we've now been starting to get hits back from animals sort of, I think Thailand was 4 months later and Indonesia was 8 months later. And so it's still early stages as far as, tracking these animals in the wild and we're seeing that success, we're seeing that survival. We also have some really important, additional conservation measures in Thailand. The species has been fully protected. So the government is very invested in the project, and we're quite quick to move for protection. In Indonesia, it's in process. The area is a marine protected area, but there is still artisanal fishing in Indonesia. However, we're getting more and more reports of when fishers are catching these, because they do come across these leopard sharks occasionally, they're releasing them. And the local school groups or local communities as well of children provide a lot of the food for the baby leopard sharks, and so they there's a lot of stewardship for this species, and really trying to shift that narrative about the importance of these types of animals in the environment, and so they're, because they are quite a cute shark species, particularly as babies, they're a lovely, I guess, entry shark, if you will, to bring people on board to, understand that not all sharks are, bitey and dangerous, and and that there's, value in these animals beyond just fishing. And so,
Well, Chris, this has been super exciting and very informative what you've been talking about. I want to ask you, what advice would you have for a young person just starting out, considering a career in marine biology or in the shark world?
So I think, firstly, you've got to love what you do. And I think you need to feel inspired to get up and do things, because it's not always easy. I think from the outside, my path looks probably quite linear, but it doesn't feel like that at all, because I feel like I've, as I mentioned, I've worked on lots of different animals and different types of projects. And so, but yeah, one of my supervisors once said, it's about 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And I kind of feel that there's a lot of truth to that. And I think, there's no one path. Like, you have to forge your own path and follow your passions. And one of the things that I probably talk to my students ad nauseum about is that apart from being a scientist, I'm also a mother. So I have a 19 and a 17-year-old kids. And so that's been a massive part of my life. Right. I had my children during my PhD, and and I see, and that's not easy. That's not easy to combine.
Both of those are like 2.5 full-time jobs separately.
And but it's possible, right? And so it's just finding your own path to make that happen, and you don't know what life's going to throw at you, so follow your passions, and just keep trying.
Great.
Love it.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for coming on. We're definitely going to have you back, 'cause I feel like we just barely scratched the surface of your career.
I'd love to.
Everything. And so we'll definitely have you come back. We'll talk about some other aspects of your career. But thank you so much for coming on today, and congratulations on your new namesake, Bamboo Shark. And
thank you.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris, for joining us on today's episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. Dave, what an interview. Lots of stuff going on in research, not only in Australia, but Papua New Guinea, around walking sharks, around a lot of different other sharks, for coral reef research we talked about. Quite a lot of stuff. I think it's interesting how as you're as someone's career progresses and they've been in the career for 20 plus years, you start to, go into different areas and really discover things as you get more and more research. I feel like, Chris is definitely an example of that.
And yeah, she has a very broad background. We talked a little about it, but we really just didn't really get into some of the other stuff she's done on coral reefs and fishes and seabirds. And she has quite a long, and I think quite a broad background. I think something she didn't mention, but if you're a young person starting out, that broad background is going to help you from a job standpoint.
Absolutely,
having a broader background and having a lot of skills. And she had. It was interesting hearing her also talk a little bit about how when she started out, she was kind of in that sort of first wave of young Australians.
Yeah. That
came around the early 2000s, and it was very similar to how the U.S. was 20 years earlier. I talk about the Jaws generation in the U.S. and stuff. When we started out, there was just nothing there. And her comment from a professor and well, go figure it out. That's pretty much what all of us had to do was well, let's go figure it out. And here Australia sort of came, again, it's hard for younger people to understand this, but even through the 90s, you had John Stevens, Peter Last, and kind of at the end, beginning of 2000, Will White kind of came on the scene. But it was just Colin Simpfendorfer, Michelle Heipel, but it was just a handful of people really in the 90s that kind of came on the scene in Australia, but they laid the foundation for the generation that Chris talked about with her.
Yeah.
Charlie Huveneers has been on the show, Pete Kind, and a few people, several other people that have been on the show, some that we haven't had on the show yet, but Andrea Marshall, she mentioned, Lindsay Marshall, these are all cohorts. It was interesting hear them talk about how they started the whole Oceania Chondrichthyan Society, which is
that was kind of cool. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
I knew she was one of the first founders down there that was involved in early on, but it was kind of cool hearing some of the story. Even though I'd been a member, I think I joined in 2008. I was a member for probably close to almost 15, 20 years so after that. So so it's kind of cool. Kind of neat hearing the parallel between Australia and contrasting with the U.S. and everything. And as I say, she, of course, the other part of it, she got into talking about diving with the crocodiles. And
that's always interesting.
Papua New Guinea. It's one of those things in North America you don't think about. I mean, if you're in Florida, you do have crocodile, you do have American crocodiles, and you do have alligators.
Yeah.
To keep an eye on a bit. But I've been down in Florida and stuff, and you got to watch them. But man, with
you're not as worried.
The saltwater
ones.
You're more on the menu with those guys, man.
Yeah,
they're
agreed.
And you're also in remote areas too. A lot of areas that they don't have. There's not signs posted keep an eye out for crocs.
It's just understood, for a lot of people who live there.
Well, it's like she said, they talk to the villagers.
Yeah.
And they kind of, and I like her comment about well, as long as they're not hungry, you're okay.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
So that was a nice little thing to share with everybody here.
And lots of gems, lots of cool things that she's been able to accomplish, and lots of things we were able to cover. And I think that's something that's really important and a lot of fun too. To be able to document and stuff like that. So it's always fun. We'll put all of her social media links in the show notes, and of course with ours. Dave, if people want to get a hold of you, what could they do?
It's Lost Shark Guy on Instagram, and also go to the YouTube channel, Lost Shark Guy. Check out our series that Andrew and I are doing with Denise Sotomayor on the Searching for Lost Sharks, Extinct or Alive. We got the first 5 episodes are up right now. There'll be a lot more coming very soon.
Awesome. Perfect. And then, and if you want to get a hold of us, Beyond Jaws on YouTube, also look at for Beyond Jaws Pod on Instagram. And of course, you can just search for us on our different socials. So thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. Thank you to Chris, Dr. Chris Dudgeon, and thank you to, of course, my co-host Dave. Thank you very much for everybody else who are listening. We really do appreciate you listening to us each and every time we release an episode. And have a great day. This has been another episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.